The Sopranos is a special show, and I don't think it needs too much of an introduction. It's a show that does so many things right, but to me it's the character writing that makes the show what it is. The cast is just so well developed and complex, and I think in terms of showing the two sides of people, no other show captures the duality of good and evil like The Sopranos. We see this duality in most of the cast. However, there is one character in the show where his duality was executed in a rather unique way that left a huge impression on me. That character would be Ralphie Cifaretto. Ralphie stands out among a group of assholes as being the scumbag of that group, and that is quite the feat in and of itself. And the show does a good job at building him up to be the audience's villain to root against. Ralph plays the role so damn well, especially in episodes like University, that I would consider him a great antagonist and character already. However, it was season 4 episode 9, titled Whoever Did This, that cemented Ralph as one of my favorite villains. And to me this has to do with the subtext of the entire episode, and how it relates to the main themes of the show. We have to look at how Ralph was built up as a character and compare that to how he was portrayed in episode 9. Before, he was built up as someone who could, and should, never be redeemed. The episode University is the most famous example, where he beats Tracy to death. Throughout season 3 we are shown no redeeming qualities of Ralphie, and this culminates in the end episode where he goes on with the murder of Jackie Jr. In season 4, we see sides of Ralph that are just plain fucking weird. If we look at the episode before Whoever Did This, we get a look into Ralph's bizarre sex habits. I think the reasoning for this was to make Ralph seem more bizarre, more crazy, and most importantly, less relatable to the viewer. Yet in Whoever Did This, we see a very different side of Ralph that almost seems rather jarring. When his son is put in the hospital, we witness a more sympathetic side to him, one that is deeply affected by the tragedy of his son. He shows rage, sadness, guilt, and so on. All emotions that are very human, compared to the previously inhuman monster that we were accustomed to. I don't know about you, but my reaction to the sudden shift was a more skeptical one. I didn't buy it. I asked myself, why would I be sympathetic to this person when he's been built up so much as a sociopath? In the beginning of the episode, this man was pulling a childish prank, terrorizing the mother of one of his colleagues, and now we're supposed to feel for this guy? It then hit me, as the episode progressed, that this was intentional misdirection from the writers. We spent most of season 3 and 4 delving in on the repugnant side of Ralphie, that any redeeming quality of his will draw our attention since it's rather novel from our perspectives. What David Chase is showing us here is that even the most disgusting people are capable of empathy and have redeeming qualities. But so what? So what? People are complex and multifaceted. Someone who constantly commits horrible acts doesn't mean they are 100% evil. This fits The Sopranos to a T, and as I've mentioned before, you can see that the duality of good and evil is present in most of the characters. Even with this in mind, how much should we still sympathize with these kinds of people? This is one of the main questions The Sopranos asks the viewer. At the end of the day, are these few redeeming qualities of a person enough to make us forget the evil in them? A quick exchange between Paulie and Tony talking about Ralph expresses this sentiment, and I believe to be one of the thematic cruxes of this episode.
That poor fucking guy.
Fuck him and his alligator tears.
Please, kid's in a hospital. A little fucking sympathy, huh?
That gives him a pass? I don't care if he's got 100 kids in the ICU with arrows in their heads. He's a piece of shit. You know it, and I know it.
Even with all this trauma happening, Ralph is still implied to have stayed in his ways, as implied with the events of the horse. Whether or not Ralph actually set the fire, I believe he did, mind you, his attitude in the confrontation with Tony implies that most of Ralph's views on morality are still the same. I want to focus on the exchange with Paulie and Tony, because to me that scene encompasses some of the main themes of the show. After we are shown the sympathetic side of Ralph, the show uses this scene to remind us that at the end of the day, he's still a scumbag, whether or not you sympathize with him in this episode. To me, this sentiment is a mirror of all the Mafia characters, and most specifically, Tony himself. If we look at the journey of Ralph in this episode, from showing a glimpse of sympathy and hope for change, only to have been implied to have fallen back to his ways, We see that this is a direct reflection of how Tony's arc is handled in the series as a whole. In Season 1, we are given the dramatic question that is the base for the entire show. Can Tony change? Just like how Ralph has a trauma that forces him to confront the decision to change, each season, Tony goes through a trauma or realization that should inspire him to change his lifestyle. In Season 1, it's the botched attempt at his life from his own family, showing that he can't trust them. In Season 2, Tony is put in a position where he has to kill one of his best friends, showing how he can't trust his own friends in the lifestyle he is in. In Season 3, Tony has to relate the deaths of Tracy and Jackie Jr. to his own daughter and son, and the potential for his own kids to be involved in this. In Season 4, he loses his family because of his mob lifestyle. In Season 5, he has to kill a family member, destroying any semblance of code left. And finally, in Season 6, nearly losing his life to his own family again, still doesn't fully change, even if he was at his closest. Even Ralph seeing the priest could be considered a parallel to Tony seeing the priest in Season 6, as both go to them after a traumatic event. However, just like how Ralphie is implied to have stayed in his ways, Tony also stays in his ways and only gets worse by the end of the show. One of the best qualities of a good antagonist is how they reveal aspects of the protagonist's nature and put them to question, and Ralphie's use couldn't be more apparent after the comparisons I've made. He is Tony's thematic parallel, and through this mirror, we can see an aspect in Tony's nature that is brought to light. His hypocrisy, and in some level, our own hypocrisy. It's not like Tony's hypocrisy is new to us. We've seen this behavior throughout the show constantly. To me, this episode is the best reminder to the audience on what kind of person Tony is at heart. In the episode where Ralph does pay for his sins by getting killed, the episode also paints Tony in his most hypocritical, and even makes Tony feel a bit on the worser side compared to Ralph, in this episode specifically. He tells Ralph he fucked his ex during the time Ralph shows his most vulnerable side to him. He chastises Polly for mentioning his desire to kill Ralph, and then Tony murders Ralph a few scenes later. It's honestly quite fitting that at the moment Tony lashes out on Ralph was when he was called out on his hypocrisy while also making a fat joke.
I don't hear you complaining when I bring you a nice fat envelope. You don't give a shit where that comes from. What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the fucking carload.
Ralph was given a sympathetic light in the episode where he pays the punishment for his sins, yet the actual justice we, the audience, receive is much more of a mockery of that term. The one who brings justice, Tony Soprano, valued the horse more than a human life being taken away, and only used the human life to justify his erratic behavior. He killed Ralph over something he suspected him of doing, without much proof that he actually did it, other than his own rationale. The main point that I want to get across is that this is a commentary on the viewer's hypocrisy as well. Even if you didn't sympathize with Ralph like I did, it's amazing to see how the characters and other viewers are so quick to change their minds. How we all of a sudden sympathize with the sociopath because of the few redeeming moments of humanity we see, only to then change our minds in a flip. In Ralph and Tony's parallel dynamic, it's made clear what David Chase is saying about us. We sympathize with people like these because of the little moments of relatability they show, but time and time again, showing a refusal to change, and eventually meeting their well-deserved demise, we all of a sudden pull off the same half-assed justification that Tony used after he killed Ralph, while ignoring that we were the ones who sympathized and rooted for them to change.
Guy was a piece of shit. Whoever did this should have happened a long time ago.
It was so easy for the audience to sympathize for monsters like Tony, and it was just as easy for us to abandon our sympathy because we think we take the moral high ground as the audience. And to further show how this relates to Tony, look at this interview where David Chase expressed constant frustration at his audience. Start quote. "The way I see it is that Tony Soprano had been people's alter ego. They had gleefully watched him rob, kill, pillage, lie, and cheat. They had cheered him on. And then, all of a sudden, they wanted to see him punished for all of that. They wanted, quote-unquote, justice. They wanted to see his brains splattered on the wall. I thought that was disgusting, frankly. But these people have always wanted blood. Maybe they would have been happy if Tony had killed 12 other people, or 25 people, or who knows, if he had blown up Penn Station. The pathetic thing to me was that how much they wanted his blood, after cheering him on for 8 years. End quote. It's an inherently fucked way to look at things if we think about it, yet this sentiment was common to the average viewers of the show. This is not to say that sympathy for the bad guy is wrong. I don't think so, and I don't think the show does either, else why would they spend so much time trying to make the character sympathetic in the first place? It's not like this is a new concept either, even though The Sopranos is a benchmark in that regard. Many stories make their evil characters sympathetic using these methods, but The Sopranos does it in a way that is very self-aware. It's almost like a trap. We are allured by the false promises that these people can change, only for it to be shown that they can't. And we are the ultimate hypocrites because we morally justify their demise, when moments before we were rooting for these awful people to succeed. It says something that in a show full of sociopathic killers, some of the most hated characters are whiny teenagers. Just like how the characters are a bunch of hypocrites, at the end of the day, we too aren't much better.